The dust never truly settled in Elias's soul, not since that day. He'd seen plenty of men die, but sparing Jake? That was a different kind of burden. Now, years later, the whisper of a familiar ragged cough in the wind felt like a ghost riding up on him, dragging a past Elias thought he buried deep. He could almost taste the old bitterness, thick as alkali dust, mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite name, a strange, unsettling echo of regret, or maybe just fate, settling in for one last unwelcome visit. Elias sat on the porch of his isolated ranch, the kind of place where silence was a comfort and the only company was the vast, indifferent sky. His calloused hands, once quick with a colt, now found solace in the slow rhythm of whittling a piece of cedar. The air was dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant thunderstorms. His mare, old but still spirited, grazed peacefully in the corral, her coat a rich sorrel against the pale, endless plains. He liked it here, away from the clamor of towns and the ghosts that haunted them. This life was simpler, starker, but honest. Then, a distant rider appeared on the horizon, a slow, deliberate silhouette against the setting sun. Elias didn't stir, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, narrowed. Few folks ventured this far off the beaten path unless they were lost or looking for something. As the rider drew closer, the slumped posture and the way he held the reins, loose and weary, spoke of a man at the end of his rope. Elias felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut. His calm demeanor was a practiced shield, but beneath it, his senses were already cataloging every detail. The rider's patched duster, the way the old hat sat low over his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he finally reined in his horse, a stone's throw from the porch. The man dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg, and the clinking of spurs on the dry earth seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet. He looked up and Elias felt a cold shock. The left eye was gone, a dark, empty socket, but the right, though clouded with age and sickness, held a recognition that clawed at Elias's composure. It was Jake, one-eyed Jake, the outlaw Elias had faced down, and for reasons he still wrestled with, had let walk away all those years ago. "Elias," Jake rasped, his voice a dry whisper, each word a struggle. He coughed, a deep rattling sound that shook his frail frame. "I ain't here for trouble." Elias said nothing, his gaze unwavering, assessing the man before him. Jake was a shadow of his former self, gaunt and clearly ailing. The once notorious quick draw now looked like he'd struggled to lift a teacup. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken history. Elias's mind raced, 1,000 questions and old resentments swirling. Why now? Why here? The broken routine, the sudden intrusion of a past he'd painstakingly buried, stirred a quiet rage within him, but his face remained a stoic mask. He simply watched, waiting for the other boot to drop. This wasn't a social call. Jake had come for something, and Elias knew, deep down, that whatever it was, it wouldn't be easy. A difficult decision loomed, its shadow already stretching long across the plains. Jake's request hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavier than any dust Elias had ever choked on. "I need one last ride, Elias, across the plains, to see my daughter. She's in Santa Fe." The words were barely audible, punctuated by a rasping cough that seemed to tear at his very insides. Elias stared, his jaw tight. Santa Fe. That was a long way, days, maybe weeks, for a man in Jake's condition. And for what? A dying wish for a man who'd caused him nothing but grief. "Why me, Jake?" Elias's voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "You got no other friends left?" Jake managed a weak, humorless chuckle. "Friends? They're all dead or afraid of me. Or worse, want me dead. You let me live once. Figure you're the only one who owes me nothing. And maybe, just maybe, you got a shred of decency left in that stone heart of yours." Elias felt a prickle of irritation. decency, after all Jake had done. But beneath the anger, a flicker of something else stirred a memory of a young woman's face, etched into a faded photograph Jake had once shown him years ago. His daughter. The one thing Jake had ever seemed to care about more than himself. The silent challenge in Jake's good eye was clear. Would Elias truly turn away a dying man's last wish? He looked at Jake's emaciated frame, his skin stretched thin over bone, the way he clutched his side as another coughing fit racked him. This wasn't the feared outlaw of old. This was just a man, broken and desperate. But the risks were immense. Bandits, rough terrain, the unforgiving elements, and the constant threat of old enemies who might still be looking for Jake. And, of course, the ever-present shadow of their shared, violent past. "I ain't a stagecoach, Jake," Elias finally said, his voice flat. "And I ain't no nursemaid." "Just a ride, Elias. I got a little something saved for your trouble. And for my burial, if it comes to that." Jake fumbled in his tattered coat, pulling out a small, worn leather pouch. The clink of coins was faint. It was barely enough for the journey, let alone compensation for Elias's time and danger. A rider appeared on the eastern horizon, kicking up a plume of dust. Elias's eyes narrowed. He hadn't seen anyone for days. This was too much of a coincidence. Jake, even in his diminished state, noticed it too. His good eye darted nervously towards the approaching figure. "Trouble?" he rasped, a hint of his old paranoia creeping back into his voice. Elias simply watched the rider approach, a lone silhouette against the fiery sunset. The man rode hard, and a chilling thought solidified in Elias's mind. This wasn't just a random traveler. The world, it seemed, wasn't ready to let One-Eyed Jake die peacefully. And now Elias was being dragged into the maelstrom. The easy life he'd built, the quiet solitude, was shattering, piece by agonizing piece. He felt a profound sense of loss, not of a person, but of his peace, his carefully constructed distance from the world he'd left behind. The arrival of this unknown rider was a stark reminder that even in his secluded corner of the world, he was losing control. The approaching rider, a lean, hawkish man with a scarred face, pulled up sharply, his eyes fixing on Jake with a predatory glint. Well, if it ain't One-Eyed Jake," the stranger sneered, dismounting with a casual grace that spoke of coiled danger. "Heard you were long dead. Guess some bad pennies just keep turning up." "Clay," Jake whispered, a tremor in his voice, not of fear, but of profound weariness. "Still chasing shadows, are we?" Clay ignored Jake, his gaze shifting to Elias, a calculating assessment in his cold eyes. "And who's your new friend, Jake?" "Another one of your sorry excuses for a gang." Elias stepped forward, his posture radiating a quiet authority that belied his age. "This is my land. You got business. State it." Clay chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "My business is with him." He gestured to Jake. "He owes me. A lot of folks he robbed owe me a cut. And I heard he was making his way to Santa Fe. Thought I'd collect my due before he kicked the bucket." Elias felt a surge of cold fury. This was more than just a debt. It was about principle, about the law of the land, about what was right. He remembered another time, a dusty main street, a young woman screaming, Jake riding off with a stolen strongbox. Elias had been quicker that day, faster on the draw. He'd had Jake dead to rights. But a flash of something in Jake's eye, fear, perhaps, or a desperate plea for his daughter, had stayed Elias's hand. He'd let him go, a decision that had haunted him ever since, a ghost whispering doubts in the quiet hours of the night. The memory was sharp, vivid as if it happened yesterday. The metallic taste of gunpowder, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. He'd stood there, gun drawn, Jake's life in his hands. And he'd holstered it. Why? A question that still gnawed at him. Was it mercy? Or a misguided sense of superiority? proving he was better than the senseless violence that defined men like Jake? Now, looking at Clay, a younger, harder version of the very man Elias had tried to escape, the bitterness resurfaced, raw and potent. He could just step aside. Let Clay have Jake. It would be easy. The old score would be settled, and Elias would be free of this unwanted burden. But then he looked at Jake, frail and defeated, his good eye fixed on him with a desperate, unspoken plea. He saw not the outlaw who had wronged him, but a dying man with one last, desperate wish. "He's with me," Elias stated, his voice low and firm, a challenge in every syllable. He knew it was a lie, a dangerous one, but the words were out before he could truly consider them. The vast, empty plains suddenly felt smaller, constricting around him. The peaceful solitude of his ranch had been shattered, replaced by the dangerous currents of a past he couldn't outrun. He was no longer just Elias, the rancher. He was Elias, the cowboy, drawn back into the fray by a choice made long ago. The choice was clear: follow the cold logic of self-preservation, or the flickering ember of what might be called honor, or even, God help him, compassion. Clay's sneer widened, revealing a missing tooth. "With you, huh? That's a mighty fine lie for a man who looks like he prefers his own company." He drew his pistol, a smooth, practiced motion. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated only by the distant whinny of a horse. "Now, I ain't got no quarrel with you, stranger. Just step aside, and this'll be over quick." Elias felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. His hand instinctively hovered near his holster, though his gun was long since put away. He hadn't drawn in years, hadn't needed to. But the muscle memory was still there, a ghost of a younger, faster self. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the inevitable clash he'd hoped to outrun. Clay was everything Elias had fought to leave behind. The lawlessness, the quick violence, the disregard for life. "He's a dying man, Clay," Elias said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Let him go." Clay barked a laugh. Dying men still owe their debts, and Jake owes a lot of men. His gaze hardened, fixing on Jake with undisguised malice. "He left my brother for dead after that train job. Elias, my brother ain't walked right since. This ain't just about money. This is about blood." The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow. He hadn't known about Clay's brother, hadn't known the full extent of Jake's ruthlessness. A wave of anger, cold and righteous, washed over him. His mercy years ago now felt like a betrayal to the innocent victims of Jake's past. He looked at Jake, who simply stared at the ground, a shamed and broken figure. "Then your quarrel is with him, not me," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "But not here. Not now." Clay ignored him, raising his pistol, aiming squarely at Jake. "Time to pay up, old man." Elias moved without thinking, a flash of motion honed by years of quick draws. He wasn't reaching for a gun, but instead, he lunged, tackling Clay before the younger man could fire. They hit the dusty ground with a thud, a cloud of dirt rising around them. Clay was stronger than he looked, fueled by a simmering rage. They grappled, rolling, fists flying. Elias felt a searing pain as Clay's elbow connected with his jaw, and a metallic taste bloomed in his mouth. He grunted, pushing back, his age making the struggle harder, but his years of hard living had given him a wiry strength. He managed to twist, pinning Clay's gun hand, and with a swift, brutal movement, disarmed him. The pistol skittered across the ground, coming to rest near Jake's feet. Clay roared in frustration, bucking and twisting beneath Elias. Elias saw a glint of steel in Clay's other hand, a knife. The blade flashed, catching the last rays of the sun. Clay lunged, aiming for Elias's gut. Everything seemed to slow down. Elias knew this feeling, the cold embrace of imminent danger. He saw the hatred in Clay's eyes, the desperation. It was a mirror of 1,000 past encounters. a world he'd sworn to leave behind. Just as the knife was about to strike, a shot rang out, sharp and deafening. Clay stiffened, his eyes wide with surprise, and then a gurgle escaped his lips. He slumped, the knife clattering to the ground. Elias rolled off him, gasping, looking up. Jake stood there, the old pistol Elias had given him years ago for protection, clutched in his trembling hand. A wisp of smoke curled from its barrel. Jake had shot Clay, not with the quick, precise aim of a gunslinger, but with a desperate, shaky hand. Clay was dead. Elias stared at Jake, then at the lifeless body of Clay. The confrontation was over, but everything had changed. Again. The dust settled, literally and figuratively. Elias stood over Clay's body, the bitter tang of gunpowder still in the air. His jaw throbbed, and a dull ache spread through his shoulder where Clay had landed a solid punch. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the turmoil in his gut. Jake, the dying man Elias was supposed to be protecting, had just killed another man. A man who, despite his vengeful intentions, had a legitimate grievance. Elias looked at Jake, who still held the smoking pistol, his face pale and drawn, his good eye wide with a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. He was gonna kill you, Elias, Jake rasped, his voice hoarse, as if the effort of the shot had drained him of the last of his strength. Elias just nodded slowly, unable to form words. He picked up Clay's pistol and holstered it. He dragged Clay's body away from the immediate vicinity of his porch, a grim, practiced motion. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the grim scene unfolding on the ground. The vastness of the plains, once a comforting solitude, now felt like an endless, lonely expanse. He was alone with Jake and the weight of their shared, bloody past. He tended to his minor injuries in silence, his mind racing. This ride to Santa Fe, if it even happened now, had just become infinitely more dangerous. Clay surely had allies, and they would be looking for him. For Jake, and by extension, for Elias. He was embroiled deeper than he ever could have imagined. The last time he'd seen Jake, years ago, he'd told him to disappear, to never cross his path again. Now, here they were, tied together by a fresh grave and an old, unforgiven debt. Jake, slumped on the porch steps, began to cough again, a deep, racking sound that seemed to tear at his very core. Elias watched him, a flicker of something akin to pity stirring within him. Jake was a condemned man, by nature and now by circumstance. His daughter. The image of the faded photograph, a faint echo of beauty and innocence in Jake's otherwise brutal life, surfaced in Elias's mind. It was the only shred of humanity Jake had ever displayed, the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him. "We leave at first light," Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He didn't offer a choice. "You ride. I'll lead." The decision was made, even though every fiber of his being screamed to abandon this folly, to leave Jake to whatever fate awaited him. But the image of that girl and the uncharacteristic mercy he'd once shown now compelled him forward. This was his last chance, perhaps, to truly close this chapter, not with a bullet, but with a different kind of justice. It was a risky gamble, a treacherous path. But as he looked out at the darkening plains, the familiar sense of duty, tinged with a profound personal doubt, settled over him. He would ride into the uncertain dawn with a murderer and a dying man, carrying the heavy burden of a past that refused to stay buried. The ride was a grueling, silent testament to the plains' unforgiving nature. Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm of creaking leather, the steady thud of hooves, and Jake's increasingly labored breathing. Elias rode ahead, a stoic sentinel, his senses alert to every shifting shadow, every distant dust plume. He felt the cold touch of the wind against his face, a constant reminder of the emptiness that surrounded them, an emptiness that echoed the one within him. He was a man suspended between worlds, his quiet ranch life, and the dangerous past he was now forced to confront. Jake, slumped in his saddle, was a ghost, his face gaunt, his good eye glazed with fever. They spoke little, their communication a series of grunts, nods, and the shared understanding of their grim purpose. Elias occasionally offered him water, watched him try to eat, the simple acts of a reluctant caretaker. He found himself looking at Jake not as the notorious outlaw, but as a frail, dying man whose last wish had become Elias's heavy burden. The animosity had not vanished, but it had thinned, replaced by a weary resignation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the faint outlines of Santa Fe emerged on the horizon. A cluster of adobe buildings, a distant church spire. A wave of exhaustion, profound and bone-deep, washed over Elias. They had made it. But the finality of it brought no relief, only a deeper, more profound sense of emptiness. They rode into the quiet streets of Santa Fe in the fading light. Elias helped Jake dismount outside a small, unassuming house on the edge of town. The scent of cooking food wafted from within, a homely contrast to the harsh reality of their journey. Jake stumbled, leaning heavily on Elias, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Elias, his good eye flickering with something akin to gratitude. "Thank you, Elias," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to." Elias just grunted, his gaze fixed on the front door. "Go on, Jake." Jake pushed himself upright, his old pistol, the one Elias had given him, still tucked into his belt. He took a hesitant step towards the door, then another, a lifetime of violence and regret etched onto his dying face. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. A moment later, the door opened. A woman, her face lined with a familiar weariness, but with an undeniable trace of youth, stood there. Her eyes, so like Jake's, widened in shock, then softened with an emotion Elias couldn't quite decipher, a mix of surprise, sadness, and something akin to a fragile hope. "Papa?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jake managed a faint smile, the first Elias had ever seen on his face. He extended a hand, a gesture of desperate yearning. "Lily," he breathed, and then, with a final shuddering gasp, he collapsed. Elias stepped forward, catching Jake before he hit the ground. He lowered him gently, feeling the last vestiges of life drain from the old outlaw. Lily knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face, clutching his hand. She looked up at Elias, her eyes filled with a raw, unspoken grief. Elias simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the end. He turned, leaving Lily with her father, stepping away from the scene, from the closure that was not his to claim. He walked to his horse, mounted, and turned back towards the open plains, leaving the town, and the ghosts of his past behind him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery hues, and Elias rode towards it, a lone silhouette against the vast, empty expanse. The journey was over, but nothing was truly settled. The old grudges had ridden shotgun, but in the end, something else had emerged from the dust, a weary understanding, a fragile thread of compassion. He was still Elias, the cowboy, but he carried a new silence within him, a deeper understanding of the burdens men carried and the long, lonely roads they sometimes had to ride. The plains stretched before him, endless and indifferent, a fitting mirror to the soul of a man who had faced his past and found a different kind of peace. He had done what he set out to do, not for Jake, but for himself, to finally silence the whispers of what if. And as the last light faded, Elias rode on into the vast, darkening canvas of the West, a lone rider, carrying not regret, but the quiet, profound weight of a life lived. His last ride was just beginning.